Hello and welcome to our webinar on the restriction of Chromium 6, what you need to know about the second call for evidence. I am Nayoni, your host today. Today we will outline the scope and timing of the ongoing preparation from the Chromium 6 restriction. We'll also summarize what you told us in the first call for evidence and explain the content of the second call. This webinar will help you decide if and what information to submit, and you will get answers to questions on the scope and content of the second call. Finally, I want to point out that this is not a debate about the need for a restriction, nor on the transition from an authorization to a restriction. Rather, we are here to support you with the process and content of the call for evidence. Send your questions throughout the event by going to slido.com and using the event code #CRVI or with the QR code on this slide. Your questions will be answered until 1 Helsinki time. You can upvote questions, and I recommend using this feature so that we cover those questions that are most relevant for you. We can only cover questions within the scope of the webinar. If you have questions that are not directly related to the topic, send them to us at echa.europa.eu/contact. The presentations are on our website and the video recording will be available right after the event. Here is our program. After this introduction, Sandrine will talk about the updated mandate and scope of the restriction preparation. Then Christoph will take you through the outcome of the first call for evidence. After him, Veino Nurmi will give you an overview of the second call. All right, it's time to give the floor to our first presenter, Sandrine Lefevre, on the update mandate and scope of the restriction preparation. Sandrine, over to you.
Good morning. My name is Sandrine Lefevre-Brévart, and I'm working in the Risk Management Directorate in ECHA, which is in charge of restriction dossier preparation activities. As you know, ECHA is currently preparing a restriction proposal on Chromium 6 substances. This is following the request from the European Commission. And as you may have seen on social media and on the ECHA website, we have recently received an update of the mandate from the Commission. So today, I will go through the updated mandate and also the scope of the restriction preparation. But before that, let me first set the scene and remind all of us about what is a REACH restriction and why a restriction proposal for the Chromium 6 substances is currently under preparation. Restriction is a tool for protecting human health and the environment from the risks that are posed by chemicals. It is often presented as a safety net as a safety net when uncontrolled risk needs to be addressed at the EU level, or when other EU existing legislations are not sufficient to address such a risk. Restrictions under REACH usually limit or ban the manufacture, the placing on the market, or the use of the substances. But it's not only that. That would be a bit too restrictive. Restrictions may also set specific conditions, such as technical measures, scientific limits, labeling requirements. So it's a very versatile tool. In this case, ECHA can prepare a restriction proposal because we've received a request from the European Commission. And usually, ECHA has 1 year to prepare such a restriction proposal. But why a restriction proposal for the Chromium 6 substances? That's a good question. Those substances are indeed already regulated. They are listed on the authorization list, the so-called Annex 14 list, and they are subject to the REACH authorization regime. Well, in fact, the number of applications for authorizations that we have received so far has by far exceeded the prediction at the time of the inclusion of the substances on the Annex 14. So that means that at the moment, as we receive a lot of applications for authorization, this is causing significant delays in the processing, but it's also in the granting of authorization. It's also causing some delays in the implementations of risk management measures, but also conditions that are set when an authorization is finally granted. So the approach that was envisaged initially a few years ago for regulating the Chromium-6 substances is no longer appropriate to ensure first a timely protections of the workers and the general populations that are exposed to the Chromium-6 substances. Secondly, the situation currently undermines one of the key principles of the authorization regime, which is the substitution of substances for suitable alternative. Third, this situation affects also the proper functioning of our internal market. And finally, when looking at the risk, at the management of risk in a more broader terms, ECHA and the commissions are currently spending a lot of resources to process applications for authorizations to the detriment of addressing risk of other hazardous substances at the European level. So for all those reasons, a restriction proposal is being prepared, and the Commission has sent a mandate to ECHA to do so. So what happened so far? Last September, ECHA received the first mandate from the Commission to start the preparation within 1 year of a restriction proposal that intended to focus on chromium trioxides and chromium acid. Those are the two Chromium-6 substances that triggering at the moment most of the applications for authorization. As part of this mandate, ECHA was also asked by the Commission to carefully investigate the potential for regrettable substitutions from these two substances to the other Chromium-6 substances that are listed in the Annex 14. And within this assessment, to also define if the final scope of the restriction should be different based on the finding of this analysis. So once we had received this mandate from the Commission, the team here in ECHA launched a first call for evidence in December. And here I would like to make a small parenthesis and thanks the 600s company who responded to this call for evidence. It was really, we received a lot of very useful information, and my colleague Christophe will mention that a bit later. But since the receptions of the mandate and during our investigation work, we noted that given the overlapping between the mapping of the substances and the mapping of the uses, there were some potential for regrettable substitution in case other Chromium-6 substances that are currently listed on the Annex 14 would not be jointly regulated with a restriction. In addition, and thanks to the call for evidence, we got the confirmation that multiple Chromium-6 substances may be used in the same factory or in the same workplace. And this led us to ask ourselves some questions regarding potential challenges in terms of monitorability of the exposure and then potential enforcement of the restriction. So we raised those considerations to the commissions, and based on that, the commission decided to send us an amendment to their initial mandate, and we received it in April 2024. So based on this finding, the Commission decided to extend both the scope of the substances to be covered by the restriction preparation, but also to extend the timing for the submission of the restriction proposal by 6 months, which means that in practice, the restriction proposal will be submitted by ECHA at the latest by April 2025 instead of October 2024. The Commission request highlights 4 elements that I would need to bring to your attention. And those 4 elements are, the first one is on the risk assessment for the workers and the general populations via the environment. The appropriateness and the effectiveness of the existing risk management measures will have to be looked at. It's indeed important to get an accurate picture of the current situation. The mandate also puts some emphasis on the analysis of alternative. So in addition to the availability, the performance, and the cost of the alternative, another element that should be looked at carefully is the potential of regrettable substitutions to other chromium-6 substances, but also the potential for regrettable substitutions between the different substances that are currently in scope. In the mandate, the Commission is also stressing the importance to assess several restriction options, not only one, and to find the most appropriate options to adequately control the risk. As part of this assessment of different restriction options, the Commission highlighted the importance also to understand the expectations of the expected industry and market responses, but also the potential impact on the European competitiveness. Finally, in the mandate, the Commission drew the importance to take stock of the authorization experience, and the Commission, for example, asked ECHA to analyze the granted authorizations, but also the applications for authorization that are currently under process or pending. If you want to read more about the content of the Commission mandates, those are publicly available on our ECHA website, and you can find them under the ECHA's current activities and restrictions. So how do we concretely interpret this mandate from the Commissions in terms of substances to be covered in the restriction proposal preparation? Well, all the chromium-6 substances that are listed on the authorization list, so on the Annex 14 list, are within the scope of our preparation. All of them except the lead chromates, because they are some kind of special beast in the story. But all the entries 16 to 22 and entries 28 to 31 that you can see mentioned on this screen are part of the scope of our investigation. In addition to those substances that are listed on the authorization list, the mandate from the Commission also includes the possibility for ECHA to include other chromium-6 substances which have a potential for regrettable substitutions. And this is the case of the barium chromate, which is highlighted in orange on the screen. This substance is currently not listed in the authorization list, for example. Now, in terms of uses and sector, the scope of the restriction preparation includes all the chromium-6 substances uses for which authorizations have been granted or for which applications for authorizations have been submitted. In practice, this means uses such as electroplating on different types of materials, slurry coating, other type of surface treatment, functional additives and processing aids. But in addition to those uses that are covered by the applications for authorization, we will also investigate the manufacturing and the formulation of mixtures. Maybe here also important to note that as part of the restriction proposal preparation, we will also take into consideration the uses for which no authorizations have been granted, and we will see what to do with those. With regard to the sectors that may be concerned by the restriction preparation work, it covers basically very similar sectors as the one that are subject to the authorizations. So here we are talking about the transportation and defense sectors. I mean here automotive, aviations, maritime, but also railway sectors. But then also a lot of industrial and general engineering applications, household equipment, packaging, so the kind of usual sectors for the chromium-6 applications. I would like also to take the opportunity today to talk a bit about the general approach that we have to prepare this restriction proposal. So I already mentioned that it's quite important for us to take stock of all the previous work that has been done on the authorization. So looking at the previous and ongoing applications for authorizations, but also we will be looking at all the downstream user notifications that have been sent to us by the downstream users. We will complement all the searches by extensive data gathering. So there has been already one first call for evidence, and we've now launched the second one early June. But here it's important to note that if we don't manage to gather certain informations via this extensive call for evidence and searches from previous authorization information, then we will have to make some plausible assumptions. So it's probably in the best interest of everyone to participate to our two call for evidence to provide the data that we have identified as missing. In terms of timing, as I said, we just launched the second call for evidence, and my colleague Vaino will soon walk you through the main elements in this second call for evidence. What is important to note is that we intend to finalize and to submit the restriction proposal in April 2025, so in about a year from now. It will then be evaluated by the ECHA committees, the Risk Assessment Committee and the Socio-Economic Analysis Committee. Those committees will most probably finalize their opinion by the end of 2026. Then those opinions will be sent to the Commission for a final decision. Here, I would like to point out some elements that are mentioned in the mandate from the commissions, because there it's clearly indicated also that the Commission will, of course, consider the restriction proposal, the opinions, but they will consider that also together with other aspects, such as the workload, to consider the final restriction scope of the restriction. And also to consider the final scope of substances to be removed from the Annex 14. In the mandate, the Commission also indicates that the entry into force of the restrictions will happen exactly at the same time as the delisting of the relevant substances from the authorization list. So before I leave the floor to my colleagues, I have maybe 3 take-home messages for you. The first one is that the scope of the restriction preparation is broad. It concerns at least 14 different substances, many uses. It is not only about the chrome plating, it's also not only about the chromium trioxide and the chromic acids. So this is something important for everyone to recognize. The second take-home message is about the fact that the scope of the restriction proposal does not preempt about the scope of the final restriction. As explained a few minutes ago, the Commission will decide at the end, together with many other elements, what will be the final scope of the final restrictions and what will be the substance to be delisted. And the third message is about the finalization of this restriction preparation. So we will finalize and we will submit the restriction proposal for opinion making in April 2025. So I would like to thank you all for your attention. And now I will pass the floor to my colleague, Christophe. He will tell you about the first call for evidence, and he will also tell us what you told us in this call for evidence and why it's important to participate to the second one. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Christoph Reinberger. I'm a team leader here at ECHA, and I'm also responsible for the preparation of the Chromium 6 restriction proposal that we are currently working on. Today, I'm going to present you some first results that we got from the call for evidence that ended in February 2024. And I will also hint at some gaps where we will hopefully get some additional information from the second call for evidence that is just starting now. All right, so I want to start by thanking all of the participants to the call for evidence number 1. As you see on this slide, we had a very high turnout, unusually high with 647 responses. And I want to also ensure you about the relevance of the information that you provided. So this is highly relevant for the preparation of the restriction proposal, and we will be looking at each and every answer and take them into account in our analysis. So thanks again. As you also see, we had a high participation across the European Union, with some member states providing exceptionally many answers, but even in smaller member states, we still have a good participation rate. So this is hopefully also an encouragement for everyone. Please participate in these calls for evidence. One aspect that is perhaps new or new to some of the respondents to other calls for evidence is that we have used a survey tool that allows you to select your own mother language. And we have generally gotten quite positive feedback on the quality and the ease of this language function. So we will definitely reuse it also in the next calls for evidence. Well, I should then also say that about 560 companies provided detailed information on their uses. Some use more than one substance and therefore they submitted several times. This is totally fine. This overall leads us to this number of 647 submissions that we got in this first call for evidence. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the most important features of the responses that we collected. And as those that participated will remember, we asked about 5 potential scientific limit values for chromium-6. So as you see on the slide, this is 5 micrograms per cubic meter, 1 microgram per cubic meter, 0.5 micrograms per cubic meter, 0.1 micrograms per cubic meter, and 0.01 micrograms per cubic meter. All of these are time-weighted average scientific limit values. Now, as you see, companies indicated whether they already complied with a specific limit value, and those are here presented on the slide in blue. So the percentages that you see here obviously highlight that more than 90% already comply with a limit value of 5 micrograms per cubic meter, and more than 70% already comply with 1 microgram per cubic meter. Close of half of the respondents comply already with a limit value of 0.5 micrograms per cubic meter, and less than 20% comply with even stricter limit values. Companies also indicated what they would do when one of these limit values would become binding. In yellow, we see the fraction of companies that could achieve a limit value by investing into additional risk management measures. Importantly, these risk management measures, they can range from better protective equipment up to full automatization of the process. So they're very different in terms of their costs, and we will talk about this in the next slide. But let me highlight here also that since for stricter limit values, there are less companies that already comply, it is then not surprising that the fraction of companies that would have to invest increases the more strict the limit value will be. The strictest limit value of 0.01 micrograms per cubic meter seems not to be achievable by many companies. These companies would then have 2 options to comply. They could either substitute to an alternative, which is here shown in green, or they could then cease operations in the European Union, which is here shown in orange. All of these answers are what companies informed us about. And as can be seen from the slide, the fraction of companies that foresee to substitute chromium-6 substances in their operations is relatively limited. Now, let me talk about the costs of achieving lower limit values. As we have seen on the previous slide, many companies would have to invest to achieve a certain limit value. We asked these companies how much would they have to pay to achieve each of these limit values. And here is the estimation of the costs for the different limit values. The costs that were indicated by the companies were then normalized per worker that is exposed to chromium-6, so that we can approximate the size of the operation of the work floor. And as can be seen, and probably this is not surprising, the costs grow from about 100,000 euros per worker up to several million euros per worker when we go from the least strict limit value to the most strict limit value. And this reflects that the most stringent limit values could only be achieved by full automatization in many cases. We also asked about emissions of chromium-6 to air, and some 339 companies reported their current chromium-6 air emissions. We tried to summarize the information obtained in a single figure, which is admittedly a little bit complex to read. So let me try and explain. Focus for a moment on the indication of the emissions in grams on the x-axis. So you see that about 40 companies, or 15% of all the companies that had reported, they had emissions below 5 grams per year. 60 companies had emissions between 5 and 50 grams per year. 120 companies had emissions between 500 grams and 50 grams, and so on. So if we look at the orange curve, we can see that more than 90% of the companies emit less than 5 kilograms per year, and more than 60% emit less than 500 grams per year. In total, there are about 10% of companies that emit more than 5 kilograms per year, and those are obviously the most worrisome emitters. We also asked companies to report emissions to water, and 168 companies reported such emissions. And these information are even more difficult to summarize concisely, because the emissions will affect humans only if the sludge from the wastewater treatment plants is subsequently applied to agricultural soil. Therefore, we asked companies whether they know about the fate of sludge in their region, and on that basis, our environmental risk expert tried to model the excess risk in the locality of the plant. Generally speaking, this excess risk is relatively low for about 87% of the reporting companies, and for 5% of the companies, the excess risk seems elevated. Lastly, we also asked companies to report information on worker exposure, and we did so per worker task. Here you see examples for 2 different tasks. On the left is a cumulative plot of exposure for spraying uses, so uses that are mostly undertaken in the aerospace and defense sector. On the right is a similar plot for dipping and immersion into the chrome bath. As you can see, the left curve is more like a staircase. This is because we have not received many responses for the spraying use and hope to obtain more in the second call for evidence. For dipping and immersion, we obtained a lot of information. So the curve on the right side is smooth, and we have a good idea of the distribution of exposure across the different companies. The way to read this curve is as follows. Consider for a moment the left curve. On the y-axis, there is the fraction of companies that are below a certain exposure value. So the maximum time-weighted exposure that was reported was higher than 15 micrograms per cubic meter. 75% of the observations were below 5 micrograms per cubic meter. About 60% of the observations were below 1 microgram per cubic meter, and so on. On that basis, it can then be said that spraying leads to significantly higher exposure than dipping and immersion, for which 90% of the observations were below 1 microgram per cubic meter. All the results that were shown so far have been for all the different chromium-6 substances that are potentially in the scope of this restriction. Here, we try to indicate also the number of responses per substance. And as you see from this table, most of the responses were received for chromium trioxide and its acids. You also see that we got quite a number of notifications and responses for sodium dichromate, for potassium dichromate, and some for strontium chromate as well. However, if we compare them to the downstream user notifications that were made for an upstream authorization, then this suggests a relatively low turnout for substances that are typically used in the aerospace and defense sector. So specifically, we lack information about those substances that are here indicated in red. And we would hope to close this information gap with the second call for evidence. So if you are using one of these substances, please participate in the second call for evidence. We can group the answers also by use category. And then we can see from that there are certain use categories where we have quite a lot of information. We have, for instance, a very good coverage of standard electroplating on metal substrates, where we have more than 400 observations. We have much less information about electroplating on plastics, and we would hope to get more information on these uses. We also lack, as I have already indicated, detailed information on uses such as painting, spraying, brushing, and slurry coating with chromium-6 substances. So there again, we would hope to obtain more information. Finally, we could also obtain more information on specialty surface treatments such as conversion coating or anodization and passivation of metal substrates. So if you are currently undertaking such uses, please contribute to the second call for evidence. So let me sum up. We got very good feedback from hard chrome platers. Thanks again for the participation. Unfortunately, we have not gotten enough feedback from the aerospace and defense sector, and also from the general transportation sector, where chromium-6 substances are also used in the maritime and railways maintenance. In addition, we also seek more information from manufacturers of chromium-6 salts. We know from the registration that there are active registrants in the Union, but we have not obtained information about their uses of chromium-6 salts. And although they have not been part of the applications for authorization in the restriction that we are currently working on, they will be subject to regulatory measures, and therefore they are invited to provide information. And with that, I will give the word to my colleague Väinö Nurmi, who will talk a little bit about the second call for evidence, our expectations, and certain data gaps that we wish to fill with this second call. Thank you very much, and have a good day.
Hello, my name is Dr. Väinö Nurmi, and I'm an economist here at ECHA at the Risk Management Directorate. I'm also the co-manager of the team that prepares the restriction dossier for Chromium-6. And I will now walk you through the overview of the second call for evidence. So the structure of the second call for evidence. There will be two separate surveys. One will be for companies that are using Chromium-6 compounds, and one will be for alternative providers or companies who have substituted to alternatives or are very far already in the process of substitution. And first I will walk you through the survey for companies that are using Chromium-6 substances. So the survey for companies that are using Chromium-6 substances. What is the purpose of this survey? The purpose is to close gaps from the first call for evidence. Christoph already explained you some of the gaps that we have noticed. The survey will be very similar to the first call and that you found in the first call for evidence. There is some fine tuning that we have done. For example, more drop-down menus, but it's practically the same survey. So for this reason, if you have already participated and gave your responses to the first survey, please don't respond to this one because we don't want to double count any answers. And we want to give the room for them who didn't answer to the first one. So who should answer? For this survey, we wish that the companies who did not respond to the first call will answer. And in particular, due to the gaps that we already mentioned, users of Chromium-6 in transportation, aerospace and defense sectors are very welcome to answer and give their responses so we can best address the issues related to these sectors. Also, users of Chromium-6 substances other than chromium trioxide and chromium acids are more than welcome to answer since the coverage of these substances is not as good as for the chromium trioxide and chromium acids. And in particular, we welcome also users of barium chromate to answer, since we didn't get any responses for this substance, but we have information that it is used in the EU. What is the content of the survey for the companies? So the survey seeks information mainly on current and historical exposure, so exposure to workers, both mainly the ones that are directly exposed, but also indirect exposure. Then we ask about the current releases to the environment. We ask about cost and effectiveness of both realized and hypothetical of risk management measures. So we ask what has been the cost of the current risk management measures that the company might have in place or has in place. And we also ask what would it cost to implement measures to comply with more strict limit values. Then in case the company is not able and thinks that they are not able to comply with a given limit value, if it's too strict and risk management measures couldn't bring the exposure to that limit, we ask what would be the most likely reaction in that case. Would it be closure? Would it be relocation? Or would it be substitution to alternative substances? Here is an example question from the survey. So here we ask how the company would respond if one of the following binding scientific limit values for occupational exposure was implemented. We have 5 different limit values that we are interested in. One of them is 5 micrograms in cubic meter, then 1, 0.1, 0.5, 0.1, and 0.01. And all these we refer to the 8-hour time-weighted average. So we ask if the binding scientific limit value was one of them, here in this example 0.5, how would the company respond? It might be that the company already complies with this limit value, then the first option is selected. Then the company might think that, okay, we are currently above that, but we could implement risk management measures to go below. Then they select the second option. If they are not sure whether that could happen, but they think that it might be possible, they select the third option, that we are not certain that we could implement risk management measures. And if they think that no risk management measures that are realistic or technically available could make them go below that limit value, then they select, we are certain that we could not implement risk management measures that would allow us to comply with this limit value. And in case the fourth option is selected, then we also ask about the non-use scenario, whether it's closure or substitution or relocation. So a couple of instructions for answering the survey. So very practical instructions. When asked for a figure, so for example, how many euros would it cost, or what is the current exposure, check the unit that we are asking and only report the figure. So no units after the figure or anything like that, or no further written explanations. There will be a separate field for comments in most of the cases, where you can explain what is behind the figure. So do not include comments in the same field with the figure. This will make it much harder to clean up the data. When we ask about the current exposure, if you have several measurements for a given task, report the mean value of the measurements. When responding, select only one use category per answer. For example, if you in your factory or in your company are doing, let's say, both electroplating on metals and spraying and brushing or slurry coating, please answer to the survey twice and report figures for that specific category in one answer. So one use, one answer. If you have several different uses of chromium-6 substances, then you have to fill the survey as many times as many uses you have. So if you operate in multiple use categories, fill in survey for each use category. We are, as Christoph showed, we have a bit of a gap in information related to slurry coating. So one specific area of interest relates to this use. So what we mean by slurry coating is chromium-6 based painting, spraying, brushing, pen applications, and these are mainly undertaken, to our knowledge, in aerospace and defense sectors. So from the first call for evidence, we have a relatively low number of responses, so 49 answers in total, and we have noticed quite a high variance in the reported compliance cost of reaching different scientific limit values, reaching from quite low values, even for strict limit values, to very high figures, millions of euros for not so strict limit values. And it is our hypothesis that many cost estimates refer to improved personal protective equipment. And in this case, the cost estimates have been on the low side, while some companies refer to complete automation of their operation, so no humans would be doing the spraying. So while we accept both of these answers, of course, so when responding, you have the possibility to elaborate on the type of the intended improvements in risk management measures, and please fill in, especially in this case, which out of the two types you mean, if it's either one of them. Then, as I mentioned, we have also a second survey, and this is survey on alternatives. It's a new survey, so this wasn't. This is not something that we already implemented in the first call for evidence. So some background for a survey. So some companies indicated that for a given scientific limit value, if they are not able to comply with the risk management measures, their best response would be substitution to alternative substances. And ECHA would like to know more on the possibility and on the cost of substitution activities. So who has this information and who should answer the survey? We see that it's the alternative providers, so the companies who are developing this technology or providing it directly for the companies that do these processes, or it's the companies who have already substituted from chromium-6 substances to some other alternative technologies. And we welcome answers to this survey from these two types of respondents. Some information about the survey. So alternative providers and companies that have substituted or are almost ready in the terms of substitution will have the possibility to submit more information. And this information that we are requesting includes type of the alternative, use categories for which the alternative could work. For example, if you see that your alternative could be used as a replacement or substitute for chromium-6 substances in painting and slurry coating, then you select this use category. Then we ask about the typical investment cost for the company that is doing the actual use. And we also ask to specify, is it per line, per plant, per worker, and so forth. And then we also ask for a comparison of operational cost of alternative against the chromium-6 technology. And we ask this in relative terms. So for example, if the cost is only 50%, so it's half the price of the operational cost of chromium-6, then you respond 50%. If it's twice more expensive than the current technology, then you select 200% in relative terms to chromium-6 technology. So you will have the possibility to compare the cost between these two options. So some practicalities for the second call for evidence. As I mentioned, there is two specific surveys that will run in parallel. You have to select the correct one based on whether you're a company that is using chromium-6 substances or whether you are an alternative provider or a company who has already substituted from chromium-6 substances. The call for evidence was launched on 5th of June, and it will run until mid-August, so 15th of August. You will see here the link to the call for evidence, and you will find the surveys from under that link. We ask you kindly to inform your members of your associations or networks so that we get the highest coverage possible for these surveys. And in particular, we would like the airplane operators to inform their repair and maintenance shops if they are the ones who are actually using the substances, so that they are also aware of this call for evidence, since in the last time we noticed that there was a gap in receiving answers from these smaller companies. This is all from me, and thanks for listening.
That concludes the presentations. Thank you to all our presenters. So to conclude, the second call for evidence is ongoing until mid-August. Make sure you don't miss the deadline to have your say. We are looking forward to getting more information from users of chromium-6 substances, including barium chromate in the aerospace, defense, and general transportation sector. Additional information from European manufacturers of chromium-6 salt is also needed. ECHA is currently working on the restriction proposal preparation, and the restriction proposal will be submitted in April next year. After that, the restriction proposal will be assessed by ECHA's committees for risk assessment and socio-economic analysis. A decision on the final scope of the restriction will be prepared by the Commission. This is the normal restriction process. Meanwhile, we will keep receiving and processing applications for authorization for the chromium-6 substances listed on the authorization list. On this slide are some useful links for following the progress with this restriction proposal preparation. The webinar will be open for questions until 1 Helsinki time. Instructions for sending your questions are visible on this slide. We will answer what we can during the time we have left. If your questions is not answered, send it to us at echa.europa.eu/contact. Thank you for joining us and goodbye.